Hello, this video is going to go over chapter 26, the water balance chapter, objective 2. So we're going to take a look at body fluid concentration and volume, how that is regulated. Now, when you hear the word regulation, I know you're probably already thinking, and you would be right, oh my goodness, the hormones in the nervous system again. And again, you would be right. So let's go ahead and dive on in and see what we're looking at here. So what we've got here is, again, regulation. So when you come up here, you see the hypothalamus detects too little water in the blood. So just reminding y'all, oh my goodness, antidiuretic hormone is involved. When antidiuretic hormone gets secreted, it targets the collecting duct specifically of the kidneys. So it closes off those gates. It opens the channels to allow water to leave the collecting duct and enter into the blood. So less water is lost in the urine. You're going to result in more urine concentration. Urine is going to be more concentrated, and then the blood level returns to normal. So this should be very familiar. Just trying to remember, hey, we've got that hypothalamus involved again because we're talking about antidiuretic hormone. So regulation of body fluid concentration and volume. The body's water content is pretty much, supposed to maintain homeostasis. It's supposed to pretty much remain constant. The volume of water taken in should be equal to the volume of water lost each day. So you shouldn't have a large dramatic change in water content within your body. It should stay about the same. Changes in water volume alter the osmolality of body fluids. Now, when we say the word osmolality, I know that's a scary kind of word for some of us. It's unfamiliar. It's not our everyday language. Osmolality means basically how much particles do you have dissolved in the plasma. So it's really the solutes that we're talking about. So if your water, if you look at it, kind of look at these little beakers over here, and you can see that this has a low solute concentration, where this last beaker has a high solute concentration. And you can see by the numbers here, a low osmolality means it doesn't have very many solutes. A high osmolality, look at that number, it's 1,000, is going to have a lot of solutes dissolved in the plasma. So again, the volume of water that you take in is going to affect the amount of solutes that you have dissolved in the plasma. It also is going to alter your blood pressure. Remember, volume, the higher the volume of water in the blood, the higher the blood pressure is going to be, and vice versa. And also the interstitial fluid pressure, the pressure on the outside of the cells. Where do we get water from? So you need to know your possible sources of water and, your intake and where it leaves from. So the majority of the water you get from either food or fluid intake. Okay, there is some water in your food. Not obviously, there's more if you drink a glass of water, but you do get water in some of the foods that you eat. So that's 90% of your water intake. And you do get some from the byproducts of cellular metabolism. So you can see here this cellular respiration equation. It takes place in the mitochondria. You've got 1 glucose plus 6 oxygen gases are on the reactant side. On your product side, you've got 6 carbon dioxide, which you're going to exhale in the form of waste. But you've also got some water being produced there that your body could utilize, and about 34 to 38 ATP molecules plus some heat. So it's an exothermic reaction. So your just cellular metabolism in general, this is just an example. You've got many metabolic reactions. This is one of them that produces water as a product, and that's going to contribute to 10% of your water intake. Now, where do you get rid of water at? Well, the kidneys are going to get rid of the majority of it, 61%. You do lose some through perspiration, and your respiratory passage is about 35%. So a pretty good amount. Have y'all ever when you were kids and stuff, exhaled on glass in the bathroom, the mirror in the bathroom, or glass on the car window as you were driving down the road? You could write your name in it. So where did that water come from? Again, that was that respiratory passage. And then feces, about 4%, provided the person is healthy and doesn't have diarrhea. That's obviously going to be where you're going to have excess water loss, not the regular 4%. This just shows intake per day and then output per day. You can see urine again is the majority. And I just thought this was funny. camels and all. So anyway, just a little bit of a break before we jump into some handouts. You've got this handout in your packet, so I encourage y'all to take a look at it. So if a person is dehydrated, that's going to stimulate that thirst reflex. Regulation of fluid gain is by the regulation of thirst. So if you're thirsty, sometimes this gets misinterpreted. So you may be thirsty, but you think you're hungry, so you eat instead of drinking something. When in reality, it could have just been you were dehydrated. So you've probably heard that before. If you're dehydrated, that's going to decrease the flow of saliva. That's going to result in increased blood osmolality. So in other words, you've got more solutes in your blood than normal because you don't have as much water. You're dehydrated. So it's not that your solutes increased, it's that your water decreased, which made you have a high osmolality, and then decreased blood volume. So these are the results of being dehydrated. Now, that decreased flow of saliva is going to cause a dry mouth and dry pharynx, which will stimulate the thirst center in the hypothalamus. The increased blood osmolality stimulates osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which is going to stimulate the thirst receptors in the hypothalamus. And then the decreased blood volume is going to result in a decrease in blood pressure, which is going to trigger that renin release from those juxtaglomerular cells of the kidneys. Renin is then going to cause that renin-angiotensin-aldosterone pathway will eventually cause increased angiotensin 2, which will trigger thirst in the hypothalamus. So all of these, regardless of which one, all of these are going to lead to the same issue. They're all going to stimulate the thirst center in the hypothalamus. That increased thirst is then going to make you want to drink more water, and then that will increase water levels to normal and get rid of the dehydration. So you've got three sensors where thirst is regulated. Like we said, the hypothalamic receptors, those osmoreceptors right there, the arterial baroreceptors, the afferent arteriole and the heart, which is going to pick up on the blood pressure and blood volume, and then that juxtaglomerular apparatus. Thirst is triggered by, like we said, an increased osmolality, more solute in that extracellular fluid, and will result in decreased saliva. This is detected by osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. When these cells detect increased solute concentration in the blood, which means lower water volume, then the sensation of thirst is triggered. Also, a reduction in blood plasma, which means low blood pressure. Those baroreceptors are detecting low blood pressure. So they're not detecting plasma volume. They're kind of backwards doing this, right? So your decrease in plasma volume results in low BP, and that's what's picked up by those baroreceptors, which trigger the sensation of thirst. And the juxtaglomerular apparatus detects that decrease in blood pressure as well, which causes renin to be secreted in response to that low blood pressure. Renin plus that angiotensinogen floating around in the blood vessels from the liver combine to form angiotensin 1, and then with the help of the angiotensin converting enzyme from the lungs gets converted to angiotensin 2, which means sensation of thirst and an increase in blood pressure. So again, this is just showing you the picture of what's going on. You've got this handout. You've got baroreceptors in the heart. You've got your juxtaglomerular apparatus in your kidneys. Combined, these are targeting the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Increased osmolality, which increases thirst. This one right here, I did not put this in your packet because of the color differences. I mean, it's a really good one, but the color differences are obviously hard to pick up on a black and white copy. So this is just a good picture here. You've got your three different stimuli, and the ultimate response is a person is going to drink something, okay? So when the oral mucosa becomes wet, sensory neurons conduct action potentials to the hypothalamus and temporarily decrease the sensation of thirst. Have y'all ever been like, oh my gosh, I am so thirsty, I could drink like the whole pool right now. I am so thirsty. You take a couple of drinks and then you're like, well, I guess I'm not thirsty anymore. Well, that's a temporary situation because, again, you got the inside of your mouth wet. Fluid consumed increases the digestive tract volume, and the stretch of the digestive tract wall initiates sensory action potentials in those stretch receptors. So basically, the fluid is telling your stomach it's full. It's got a lot of stuff in there. Those sensory neurons conduct action potentials to the thirst center of the hypothalamus, where they temporarily suppress the sensation of thirst. So you can see now why eating something would make this thirst sensation go away, because it is getting your oral mucosa wet and it's increasing the volume of your stomach. So those two combined, you can see why a person would no longer feel thirsty, why they would be confused with not feeling well, thinking they need to eat something when in fact they really are dehydrated. Regulation of water loss. Again, we already talked about this. We're going to stick with the urine part of this, that 61% that is lost in the form of urine. And kidneys are the primary organ that regulates the composition and volume of these body fluids by controlling the volume and concentration of water excreted in the form of urine. You can probably see where we're going with this. This sounds a lot like antidiuretic hormone, and you would be correct, partially correct. There are some other factors at play, of course. So I need you to understand this word here, regulation of extracellular fluid osmolality. So we're talking about the regulation of the solute concentration. So when you alter the water content, that's going to change the solute concentration. If you have more water, your solute concentration is going to be less because you've got more water to dissolve the solutes. So it's going to have a low osmolality. If you have a very little amount of water, then your osmolality is going to be high because you have solutes, but you don't have as much water to dissolve them in. So again, osmolality is talking about solutes. When you change the water concentration, you change your solute concentration. Body fluid osmolality is maintained at about 285 to 300 milliosmoles per kilogram. I'm not going to ask you the number. You may need to know it for the nursing program. But how is this body fluid osmolality maintained? Through water retention or water secretion. So you can kind of see, oh, that's the kidneys coming in there. So an increase in osmolality, this means if you have a high osmolality, you have very little water, okay? That's going to trigger thirst and the antidiuretic hormone secretion. High solute, low water, okay? So thirst. Consumed water is absorbed from the intestines and enters the extracellular fluid. Antidiuretic hormone acts on the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts of the kidneys to increase reabsorption of water from the filtrate back into the blood. And then a combination of both of these is going to result in increase in the amount of water entering the extracellular fluid, which will ultimately decrease the osmolality. So you have two events taking place that are not really, they're happening simultaneously, resulting in the same end, but they're not working together, if that makes any sense. So increased osmolality of the extracellular fluid. So keep in mind your extracellular fluid is talking about the fluid that is between the cells and the tissues and the plasma. So these two collectively are known as extracellular fluid because it is the fluid that is outside of the cells. So extracellular fluid is both of these. So you can see you've got your pathway for thirst and your pathway for stimulation of antidiuretic hormone. The end result is you're going to get more water available in that extracellular fluid, more water in the plasma, or more water in the interstitial fluid space. So regulation of extracellular fluid volume. So previously we were talking about solutes, osmolality. Now we're talking about volume, okay? So two different things. Sensory receptors that detect changes in blood pressure are important in regulating extracellular fluid volume. An increase in blood pressure means you have a high extracellular fluid volume. High water, high blood pressure, okay? More volume, more blood pressure. Less volume, less blood pressure, okay? So we're talking about volume here. When we say extracellular fluid volume, we're talking about water. Where is blood pressure monitored? You guys should already know this. The carotid sinuses by baroreceptors, aortic arch by baroreceptors. The juxtaglomerular apparatus has got those afferent arterioles right there. Receptors in the wall of the atria, and then large veins. Large veins may be a new one, but definitely one that is helping regulate extracellular fluid volume. All of these receptors for blood pressure activate a neural pathway and 3 hormonal pathways to regulate extracellular fluid volume. So when we're looking at mechanisms for regulation of this extracellular fluid volume, we're looking at the neural pathway and then 3 hormonal pathways. That would be the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone pathway, atrial natriuretic hormone, and antidiuretic hormone. These should all be familiar to you. When we're talking about regulation of this extracellular fluid volume, we are talking about fluid that is between the cells and fluid in the plasma. You can see that there's more interstitial fluid than there is plasma as far as extracellular fluid volume. So, if you have got increased extracellular fluid, that means you also have a high blood pressure. High volume, high blood pressure. Low volume, low blood pressure. So I need you to understand the relationship between these two. So these are just some situations here. If you have a high blood pressure, what's that going to do to your three hormonal pathways and your neural pathway? So you have got decreased aldosterone secretion. So if your blood pressure is already high, you're not going to want to secrete aldosterone, because what does aldosterone do? Makes your blood pressure high. So you're going to want to do the opposite. Again, high blood pressure means you're not secreting antidiuretic hormone, and high blood pressure means you are decreasing sympathetic stimulation. Sympathetic stimulation is your fight or flight. That's when you're engaged in physical activity. So you want to decrease that sympathetic stimulation, bring yourself back down to normal again. And then you're going to increase atrial natriuretic hormone, or atrial natriuretic peptide, from the heart. Remember, this one right here does the opposite of everything else. So if everything else is trying to lower blood pressure, this one's the only one that's going to be secreted when blood pressure is high, and it will result in lowering blood pressure. Now, the opposite over here, if you have low extracellular fluid volume, that means you have a low BP. How is your body going to respond? It's going to create all these situations that are going to increase blood pressure. It's going to increase aldosterone, it's going to increase antidiuretic hormone secretion, and it's going to increase sympathetic stimulation to get that blood pressure back up. What you're not going to see is atrial natriuretic hormone or atrial natriuretic peptide. That does not get secreted when blood pressure is low. It only gets secreted when blood pressure is high. So if you understand your hormones and what they're doing, this should make sense. You should be familiar with this. We just kind of put it in a different looking kind of table just to kind of help you visualize that a little bit better. Now, your neural mechanisms. When an increase in blood pressure is detected due to high extracellular fluid, which means high blood pressure, the sympathetic division of the nervous system is going to inhibit signals to those afferent arterioles, causing them to dilate. Those afferent arterioles, remember, are going into the glomerulus of the nephron. So the blood pressure is too high, so we're trying to decrease the volume of blood going into that glomerulus, the blood pressure. So we're going to dilate them. This causes an increase in glomerular capillary pressure. You are flooding that glomerulus with a bunch of blood now. You open the gate, so to speak, so blood is flooding in. And to that glomerulus, that's going to increase glomerular filtration rate, which will increase filtrate volume, which will increase urine volume. So the sympathetic division is going to inhibit signals to the afferent arterioles, causing them to dilate, because you're trying to offload volume so you can get that blood pressure lower again. This handout right here, we're going to take a look at these a little bit smaller so that way you can see it better. We're just going to take a look at each individual picture at a time. You have this handout. I'm going to go through the upper pathway. On your own, you can do the opposite and go through the bottom pathway, but we're going to take a look at what if homeostasis is involved because is disturbed because we have a high blood volume, which means we have elevated blood pressure. So we're going to take the northern route, so to speak, and you can go the bottom route on your own. So looking at this, again, we're going to take a look at going along the top. If the stimulus is high blood volume, that means we have high blood pressure. So what actions happen when blood pressure is high? You've got several organs involved. Your blood vessels, sympathetic division, baroreceptors are going to detect that increased blood volume, which causes that vasodilation in those renal arteries. We just mentioned that. The heart, atrial cardiac muscle cells secrete ANH when blood volume increases. Remember, this is the only one that is going to be secreted during an increase in blood pressure. The juxtaglomerular apparatus will inhibit renin when blood volume increases, which decreases aldosterone secretion. So you don't want renin and aldosterone anywhere around when your blood pressure is already high. So you're trying to prevent those from being secreted. And then your baroreceptors in the pituitary inhibit antidiuretic hormone secretion because, again, we want that urine to be dilute. We don't want to keep the water, we already have high blood pressure. We want to offload the water. So we're not going to secrete antidiuretic hormone, and we're going to let the urine go out through the body and decrease that volume, hopefully decreasing blood pressure along with it. Now, increased renal blood flow will increase the rate of filtration, and more water is going to be excreted in the urine. Decreased aldosterone and renin will increase atrial natriuretic decrease. Atrial natriuretic hormone is going to increase, and that's going to decrease that sodium reabsorption. Keep in mind, water follows sodium, so if you decrease sodium reabsorption, you're also decreasing water reabsorption. So you're putting sodium and water out through the urine, which will decrease blood volume. Decreased antidiuretic hormone is going to decrease water reabsorption by the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Less water in the blood means more water excreted in the urine. So you're going to get very dilute urine here. Reduced blood volume due to loss of water and sodium in the urine is going to lower blood pressure, hopefully. And I'll let you go the opposite route on your own because, again, you do have that handout. So extracellular fluid volume, the first hormone we're going to talk about is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism, which is going to respond to small changes in blood volume. An increase in blood volume causes an increase in blood pressure. The juxtaglomerular cells detect this rise in the afferent arterioles and reduce renin. Again, blood pressure is already high. If you have an increased blood volume, it's already high. You don't want to increase it even more by secreting renin. You're going to do the opposite. So decreased renin means less angiotensin 1, means less angiotensin 2. This was that potent vasodilator. Less aldosterone lowers the sodium reabsorption, leads to more sodium in the filtrate, meaning it's going to go out in the form of urine. Less water reabsorption means, again, more water and sodium going out in the urine. Results in increased urine volume, which means the extracellular fluid volume is reduced, and blood pressure is going to drop, returning to normal. So again, this picture here we've already talked about. It should look very familiar. So what we're doing is, if you have got low blood pressure, that's when renin is going to be stimulated. So if you have high blood pressure, you're going to do the opposite of that and not secrete renin. Another hormonal pathway is atrial natriuretic hormone. So this is going to respond to larger than normal blood volume by the walls of the atria, detecting a stretch due to more blood passing through. This triggers the secretion of atrial natriuretic hormone. So again, the stimulus for this one is high blood pressure, high blood volume, high blood pressure. Atrial natriuretic hormone, we talked about this previously, reduces sodium reabsorption from the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, which means sodium and water are going to get lost in the urine and they're going to get out of the body. Decreases extracellular fluid volume, which decreases blood volume. Atrial natriuretic hormone does not appear to respond to a decrease in heart volume. So basically, atrial natriuretic hormone is only going to respond when blood volume's high, not when it's low. It's not going to do anything. So again, increased blood pressure in the right atrium is going to increase atrial natriuretic hormone secretion, which is going to increase water and sodium excretion, getting it out in the form of urine, which will ultimately decrease blood pressure. Now, the last one is antidiuretic hormone. So antidiuretic hormone is going to respond to large changes in blood pressure. So when you have an increase in blood pressure, that will inhibit antidiuretic hormone. So again, low blood pressure, antidiuretic hormone is going to be secreted. High blood pressure, antidiuretic hormone is not going to be secreted. If you don't have antidiuretic hormone, that means the reabsorption of water is not going to happen. Water is going to stay in the kidneys and go out the ureters, increase urine production. Larger volumes of dilute urine, this is going to decrease extracellular fluid volume and decrease blood pressure. And that's going to conclude objective 2. Now, keep in mind, what we talked about there was if we have a low blood pressure. You could also say the same thing if you have a high blood pressure and go that route as well, which would be the opposite of what we just talked about for those 3 hormones.